Hello and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most popular work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And we are here to talk about some more chapters from False Moves. But before we do, it's your reminder, submit some fan art to the fan art contest. You know, it's good. You can win a cash prize.
Yep, we've already got some submissions. They're great so far, so keep them coming. You've got till the 30th of July.
Yeah, just under a month now.
There's a link to that in the show notes if you want to, read all the legal mumbo jumbo. But yeah, prize of $100. Theme is siblings. Please check it out.
Yeah. Shall we get on with the show? Oh, actually, also, in case you don't know, you can also come talk about this podcast and all the other podcasts on the Duff Media Network and any kind of related auxiliary media on the Duff Media Discord. You can find the link to that at duffmedia.com/discord.
Yeah, we're just going to keep beating that drum. It's free. It's public now. You do not need to be a patron. So
yeah, any
please
old
stop acting surprised.
Random can join. Any old nerd. Huh?
Yeah. Also, as well, just back on FANART, the pale amalgam sheet that we link in our show notes that has like all the chapters and the word counts and stuff. It also has a second sheet where Fairlax is trying to gather like all of the pale fan art that gets made.
Yes, it's a very admirable effort for sure.
Yes, but they're not omniscient, so I think they catch most of the stuff that goes on Reddit. But like, if you know of pale fan art that's mostly been on like Twitter or Tumblr or somewhere, I think on that sheet there's like a way to get in contact with Fairlax to basically submit that art. Please do so.
Please do.
We're going to be using it for All Packed Up too. So for no other reason, it means it's more likely it'll show up during All Packed Up too, or All Paled Up. I don't know what we should call it for short. Our big 25-hour live stream. Stuff there, and it also just means that people will be able to find it. Years from now via this sheet.
Yeah. Anyway, should we get into it? We're talking about False Moves 12.2 and 12.3 today. 12.2 starting with Avery. We've jumped back a little bit before the Fae trial. Avery and Verona chit-chatting, and Avery makes her decision to go wolf mode.
At first I was like, God, another bloody like flashback to before this trial. Like, we had so much leading up to it. So I couldn't figure out like why there was possibly more to go into here. Especially like 11-13 sort of went through how they were all feeling going into it. But this is like a really fun, this whole first half of this chapter is just hyping us up for like, Avery basically going full goblin against this fairy. And it works very well. Like, I am glad these parts of Avery's flashbacks were sort of saved for this, just so this whole chapter can basically just lead up to her like ruining Finnea's day.
Yeah, getting the explanation of why she wants to go wolf mode, I think, is great. Although, this is kind of, I know we've talked about this a bit already, but it's worth calling it out here again. Like, what Avery is doing here is basically saying, hey, you know how there's this stuff that we backed away from doing for good reasons before, and we're planning on doing it now. And it just makes me think like, I mean, this is what practitioners are, right? Is a sliding, very slippery slope of, worse and worse things that these girls are now making an active choice to take a step down on. And it just makes your skin crawl a bit.
Yeah, Avery sort of directly addresses like, hey, we need to be careful about the fact that what we're doing here is indulging in impulses we decided weren't healthy and we shouldn't do.
Yeah.
You're right. I think that's been talked about a lot, but it was good to see like one of the Kennedys explicitly call that out. It's like, hey, we should be careful. Although it's like, I mean, that said, like in 11.12, I think it was, we saw Lucy like come to terms with the things she did to Paul through this as a vehicle, and then obviously we'll be talking at the end of this chapter. Avery kind of gets over the things she did to Pam earlier on. So like those two definitely managed to use it for like, growth and healing and sort of coming to terms with stuff. So it was actually like the most healthy outcome. You'll notice that there's one member of the trio I have not included so far.
Well, hopefully their journey of growth is coming soon.
Yeah, we'll get to her later in the episode, I'm sure. But at least for Avery and Lucy, it's been very much like Avery's concerned that this could go wrong, and it probably could have. But like for those two, it seems to have gone great.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like that point of this being growth moments for both of them. I think that's a very cool connection, and I hope to see I hope to see Verona's.
I don't know. I have a feeling this third beat might get a little more complicated because for all of them, it's really coming back to the problem that was driving them in the first arc and a half, 2 arcs. Like for
Mm,
Lucy, it was the anger and the cursing of Paul. Obviously, with Avery, it was all of her shit with Pam, and then Verona's got the Half-Life stuff. But
mm.
I love that we're sort of using this stuff from so early in the story to really show how far at least two of them have come with
Yeah,
just the way they've both so maturely handled stuff that really threw them, what in their time was like 2 months ago, 3 months ago.
yeah, true. It's been quick growth, huh?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I love Avery's logic of like, I want to try and be as nice as I can as much as possible, but when people fuck us, I want to be able to fuck them right back, basically. Which I think is, I mean, it's harsh, but I do kind of like it. It's like, man, I feel like every time I make a comparison, I'm bringing up kind of modern, the modern world of progressivism, but I feel like it's this idea of like, you can't politely ask people not to be Nazis. At some point, you have to get a bit more mean. And I like Avery's embodiment of that here.
It is hard to not make those comparisons with this story.
I
We've
mean,
done
they
it so
feel
much.
pretty much there, right? I don't
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
Maybe it's just me.
No, well, it's at least just us. But yeah, I really love this as a moment because like Avery and Lucy, again, just to single the two of them out, apparently.
Isn't Verona meant to be your favorite, Elliot?
Yeah. We'll get to her later. She's in it later, but like Lucy and Avery have had this really interesting kind of inverse journey centered around like assertiveness and like I don't know, standing up for what's right. Like, but like from opposite sides. Like Lucy obviously started sort of too combative. She was hostile by default, and she's been learning to like lead with compassion.
Mm,
Whereas obviously Avery was way on the other side and just like ran away from everything and was like isolating herself and was alone.
mm.
And so while Lucy is learning that stuff with compassion, it's kind of cool to see Avery start to learn the times when she just needs to dig her heels in and tell people to just like fuck off.
Yeah. Yeah.
It does have vibes of like that thing like people say sometimes where it's like you got to be like more scared of the really nice person when they get angry
Mm,
because I guess they've got more shit bottled up and they're not used to having to deal with it. There's definitely a bit of that from Avery where it's just like, we see her go up against Finnea and she's just like almost a little scarily good at just being like, okay, so how do I completely fuck up everything about her day?
mm.
And just like not questioning that as her motive. Like she's set her mind to, I'm going to ruin Finnea's day. And she's a little bit concerningly good at following through on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's I don't know. I think the point of Avery taking this learning to turn into somebody who's no longer, shy isn't quite the right word, but you know what it is, like not
Like
assertive.
who withdraws. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, like, yeah, it's it's a bit rough how far she goes in some of these scenes, but then again, it's against Finnea, and
Yeah.
you can't not do that and expect to go well, you know?
No, exactly. Like this is like it's a little bit weird and uncomfortable because this is very much her doing it in the situation where she needs to do it like too much.
Yeah,
Like in general, you sort of want it to be a step down from this, but yeah, like
yeah.
as you say, like this is kind of the situation where it probably needed this over the top nastiness.
Mm,
So it's hard to fault her too much for it.
mm, yeah. Um, so yeah, Avery decides to be the villain of Finnea's story.
Yeah, like as we said, like the whole chapter up until this point has just been like sort of hyping up to the reveal of like what Avery is thinking with her like not actually a trial by combat, but like her flipping the table logic, and it's just so good. Like yeah, all the stuff with like it just felt so unavery. Like I got kind of literal chills as I was reading her, just being like, okay, I'm going to be the antagonist. I need to figure out what is going to make her miserable. How do I achieve that in any way possible? Like I was just like, fuck, that is so not Avery. This is going to be wild. And it
Mm.
was.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, it is. You really are like, oh, this is going to go crazy, and it does, and it's so much fun.
It, it as an aside though, in all like I feel like an idiot when I realized this, but I was like, oh, that's what the wolf is. Like and like this all sort of
Mm,
came together in this chapter for me, but it was like the wolf is just like a pure antagonist. Or I guess if you know boot up the Forest Ribbon Trail and it loads your version of it, it's your antagonist. Like I just remember in 10.a we were like trying to jump back and forth between sort of it like, oh, is it self-loathing or is it like what you fear?
mm,
And it because it kind of felt like it was both. And I think maybe we were just over complicating the whole thing. Like
mm.
it is kind of both because like obviously your antagonist is going to draw on both your self-loathing and your fear to ruin your day.
Well, yeah, the stuff that you are the most, I don't know, frightened of about
Yeah.
yourself.
Well, it's just going to do anything it can to make you uncomfortable, bring you down, like fight against you, and that's going to
Yeah,
involve your self-loathing and your fears. But yeah, it just
yeah.
like I think it was funny because it was like I was looking at it this very traditionally otherversy way of like it must represent some like core concept or whatever, but like it's a lost thing. It's something a bit more abstract than that. It's just
Mm,
an antagonist. And thinking about like all the things about it, like with John on the promenade, like how with his it was just like the old white practitioner who kept claiming to know everything about him and own him,
mm.
everything about its role in the Forest Ribbon Trail. I was like, oh, like this is so obvious in retrospect. I think I went way off base trying to like overcomplicate what the wolf was, but
Overthink
it's
it.
just
Mm,
yeah, a pure antagonist to anyone and everyone around it.
yeah.
Um,
And that's what Avery's channeling here.
yeah, which is like so cool and also scary.
Mm,
Like, I just love it as a concept.
yeah.
Makes me rethink like some of the stuff that went down on the promenade though. With like with the wolf kind of tearing apart the promenade, was that more evidence that the promenade is other lost coming together, or was it because the finders were working together, so the wolf was combating that?
Mm,
I don't know. I it feels more and more like I'm starting to buy into some of the theories a lot of people talk about with like the wolf being involved in the finale of this story.
mm,
Um, I don't think it's going to be like the main conspirator or anything like that. I can't see how that would work. I mean, I've said that before, and Wildbo's proved me wrong. So, like, like
yeah, no, I agree. I can't see it. Like, I don't think the wolf is behind the Carmine mystery,
no,
to put it bluntly.
yeah, it would be wild to me. But yeah, as I said, Wildbo's proved me wrong about stuff where I'm like, you can't make that work in the past. So it's so possible. But like, yeah, like part of me was like, I'd love it if the wolf was the big bad because then this story would be all about fighting the big bad wolf.
Mm,
Which is a very nice like bit of wordplay to build your whole story around. But I think that's how I work, not necessarily how Wildbo works.
mm,
Um, but I can see the wolf being involved in the finale in like maybe Marissa could do some bullshit to pull it out into the real world or I don't know what like or maybe like going to the promenade will be really important for the finale for some reason and fighting the wolf there. But it's just like I just love the idea of like part of the climax of the story being centered around just fighting someone who doesn't stand for anything except standing against you. Like the wolf is
mm.
just this pure antagonist, and that's like Pale. I love Pale, but like obviously a big thing about Pale is like all of the villains are somewhat like empathized with, and you don't want them to suffer. The wolf is going to be closer to Bristow, where it's just like, yeah, get shit on, you piece of shit. Like, I,
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun downfall to watch.
yeah, I think like for part of the finale, I could see it really working to just have the wolf come in and tear shit up, and we're just gonna get to be like, yeah, just fucking like fight it.
Mm,
Whereas with something like Marissa and stuff, there's still gonna be a sense of like, oh, you need to do this the right way. I'll enjoy like a reprieve of the wolf just like getting owned.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we'll probably at the end we'll probably get to understand because even Bristow at the end of Bristow thing, it wasn't like a clean win. It was a bit like, oh, that sucked.
Well, yeah, it's he's ingrained enough in the system that cutting him out leaves wounds.
Oh, and even like sending him to the brownies, I felt a little bit
Oh yeah.
bad about. Like
He
he kind
chose
of
that,
did that.
Elliot. Yeah, I don't feel too bad about it because he chose that ending for
I know.
himself.
And wait, that's the worst part about it. Is it sucks, but it was like him who made it suck. And but like I even if the wolf comes in to just sort of be the muscle of the finale or whatever, there'll probably still be a moment where it's just like, oh, that kind of sucks for the wolf.
Mm,
Like if we get one of those for Bristow, I think we get one of those for everyone.
yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see. Um, so, uh, can we talk about this? I I want to talk about my feelings on the Aurum and how they evolved over the course of this chapter because, like, we see over the course of this chapter, Avery turn things from them being very much on the back foot and the Aurum siding with Finnea on almost everything,
Yeah,
to them being very much on the front foot and the Aurum siding with them on mostly everything. Right?
yeah,
It sides with Finnea a few times, but basically, it feels to me kind of like the Aurum will basically just side with whoever is dramatically taking the lead in a conversation and like scoring conversational points rather than judging as somebody like, let's say, a judge would on a kind of objective or rational assessment of the situation. Like thinking back to the Sable had some weird and disconnected moments but felt kind of objectively like it was weighing things up and making a decision based on what it was presented. Whereas the Aurum just kind of feels like it's whoever has the momentum in the conversation, it will side with them. And it's kind of wild. Did you get this vibe as well?
yeah. Because there was a part of me like I was trying to piece together like the Aurum's priorities and like internal logic and rules as I was sort of reading this chapter. And I don't know if I just didn't read this one and the other one carefully enough, but like, yeah, I was like, I can't understand the system the Aurum's using beyond just, yeah, as you said, whoever is just sort of talking the most confidently
Yeah.
and like kind of making some good points, but like more about just undermining the other person's point of view rather than making a case for their own.
Yeah.
Um, the best I could say about the Aurum after like finishing these few chapters is, at least by the end of it, he was kind of equally unfair and full of shit. Like he just, it's like like a bad umpire, but they made bad calls for both teams. So it's like not like a corrupt umpire, just a bad one who's consistently bad.
Yeah. I mean, I get that vibe. And like, that's just obviously not reassuring in any way, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's pretty clearly a whiff.
well, yeah, because like unless I've missed something, um, he he doesn't seem to actually stand for anything. Like I, as you said, like with the Sable, you kind of got this idea of like, this is what he thinks, and like this is this is what he was doing. If anything, he probably went too far the other way. Whereas like the Aurum just, yeah, as you say, like never actually gives any input, just sort of like goes with whatever people suggest. He never he he's never enforcing a rule until somebody else suggests it.
Mm.
And I think that sort of falls within that discretionary power the Saber went over them having. It's just like, fuck, it's frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah, it totally is. Yeah. I don't know. The Aurum is not my favorite judge currently, I
No,
suppose.
no, yeah, like, yeah, just fucking take some initiative. Like, he didn't feel like a judge. He felt like a, what do you call it when people try to do things before the court? They used to do it in The Good Wife all the time.
Uh,
Like where they meet with somebody who sort of helps them reconcile or whatever before taking it to court.
oh, like an arbitrator.
Yeah. That feels like a weird word to use here, but you know what I mean? Like, just he's not actually, yeah, never actually enforcing anything that somebody else doesn't come up with. Just, yeah,
Yeah. Um,
letting bullshit happen based on how it happens, which is like such a shit way of managing.
yeah, it's pretty shitty. So I wanted to call out a moment that I really liked, just a moment between Cherry and Snowdrop, where Cherry like jumps into onto a Fae and crawls beneath his armor and crawls around in like it's the effectively a not as quite to scale but similar moment from Avengers where Ant-Man goes inside the Iron Man suit, right? And then Snowdrop tries to do the same thing, but it's just too big to really do it. So just kind of climbs around on the breastplate. And I just found that such a fucking funny moment. I loved it.
I I was legit emotionally affected by the moment just before this, which is when Cherry Pop first shows up and like starts crying as she tells Snowdrop how worried she is.
Oh,
And she's just like, I thought I'd never get to force you to chug milk again. I'm so glad I nearly drowned.
yeah,
Cherry Pop's so adorably pathetic.
yeah.
Um,
Ah, wonderful.
God, and the bit later where she's like, the parents are building a phone tree, which I think is stupid because you'd have to climb all the way up there to answer the phone.
Yeah, good stuff.
Such an idiot.
Classic stuff for sure.
Oh, we also need to call out Liberty's gremlin, who has batteries and a light bulb embedded in its skull with
Mm.
its hair sticking out just because I fucking love it. Like that. I just love Goblin.
It's worth calling out. I mean, obviously, we've seen all the goblins. We see some like goblin weapon forms and stuff that we haven't seen from the local goblins. But all of Liberty's goblins as well are so funny. The one that's like a pregnant goblin
Oh
that
yeah,
turns into a gun that shoots out like fetal goblins connected with an
umbilical
umbilical
cord.
cord. Yeah, so good.
And then they like land, chew off their umbilical cord, and then start causing mayhem. Like it's fucking wild.
Yeah.
Um, I love like yeah. So this one like the little gremlin with all the batteries and the light bulbs, it turns into fucking like I don't know what you actually call them. You know, like Asami's electricity sticks from Legend of Korra. Like that's
Mm,
Liberty
mm,
basically walks around like a punk rock version of Asami,
yeah.
and I was here for it. Like goblins are so badass.
Yeah, it is very fun. And yeah, I mean, they kind of start taking control of the narrative here. There's there's this bit where Lucy makes an argument because Finnea is just kind of complaining about the goblins that are running wild and not arguing her actual points. And Lucy says if she can argue for things to be forfeit because we're talking amongst ourselves, her overwhelming focus on other stuff means I should be able to dismiss the charges. And I'm just like, oh
Yeah,
yeah, Lucy, that's so fucking good. Like turn around her shitty um, arguments on her. So great.
yeah, and like Lucy has a couple of those. They like Lucy and Avery get this great dynamic throughout this whole section, which is where Avery's basically just working with Liberty to cause absolute fucking chaos, and then when as soon as Finnea starts to complain, Lucy just jumps on her and like twists it around,
Yeah,
and it's so effective. And you just like it's like because it's when they're using the actual like numbers advantage they have like over her, because then it just means that if she's not focusing on Liberty and Avery, they're continuing to make things worse. And if she focuses on the Aurum, that's when Lucy just sort of interrupts her and interjects, and she can't do anything. And
yeah,
that
she
that's when
can't
the
win.
tide turns.
Yeah, it's I mean, I guess we'll talk about this in a moment, but it feels pretty brutal to
Oh yeah,
Finnea.
yeah. No, I know what you mean. We'll definitely get to that.
Yeah,
Before we move into the next section, I do want to call out the last thing, which is where when Avery shoots the fairy that always calls out the demerit points with
with
Doglic's like
Doglic's
tongue.
tongue.
So
Yeah,
it's like her mouth is covered with his like tongue,
yeah.
and she can't talk, and she just sort of looks at Avery, and Avery just turns to her and goes, "Let's assume I get demerits for that." And I
Mm-hmm.
just want to call this out because I often make fun of Avery's one-liners for being kind of corny lame. This one's just 100% badass. I chuckled out loud. I was like, "That's a full-on like Jack O'Neill or like Tony Stark line." Like 10 out of 10.
Yeah, it's a very good line, isn't it? Um,
I very much enjoy that sort of like style of humor or badassery. I was
yeah,
fully on board with it.
yeah. Um, So yeah, after they've thoroughly thrown Finnea off of her game, Finnea tries to make a few last-ditch arguments. Some stick, most don't, but things are pretty much generally just continuing to descend into chaos.
Yeah, and I think this is where we'll start to get into what you were just hinting about a second ago, because
Mm,
there's a moment as this starts to happen where Avery starts calling in goblins that they didn't actually have on them. Because the logic up
yeah,
until this point to get the goblins in has been we should get the tools we had on
We
us.
prepared
Yeah,
them. Yeah,
when we came,
exactly.
and so they start getting, and then she calls in Blunt Munch, and he's like thinking, Blunt Munch wasn't here when this started. Please don't notice. Please don't notice. And
Mm.
like Lucy comes in to help distract her, and it's great. But as this was happening, part of me was like, I mean, yeah, this is great for the Kenneteers, but also like just once again, fuck the Aurum
Yeah.
because like
Shouldn't the Aurum be helping to arbitrate this? He's
what
basically does nothing.
Well, yeah, this is the thing. He doesn't enforce anything unless somebody like calls it out. Like he's happy to let people abuse stuff as long as like nobody actively complains, and it's just such
Mm.
bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah. It is bullshit, 100%. I empathize with Finnea for a little bit here because her basically the argument that she makes here is like, you three are just coming in here and being practitioners, just kind of fucking shit up and being unimpeachable and enforcing your will on me and you know all these fae. And like, it's totally true. It's 100% true. And yes, the thing is, that's the way you have to deal with this situation with Finnea and with Faye in general. Having said that, it is 100% true. What she's saying?
Yeah, no, you're right. It sort of comes back to what we talked about last week with that idea of like, I don't know how else you deal with fairy.
Yeah.
Like, if you come at them with civility, that's their playground, and they're going to turn it against you. So you
Mm,
have to do this shit with goblins to even it out, and but they do more than even it out. So yeah, yeah, I don't. Yeah, let's not get into this again because I still don't know. But it's like, yeah, it's I agree. I feel bad for Finnea, but also I don't know what else the Kenneteers were meant to do.
mm, yeah,
Um,
100%.
she does definitely lose points though. Like I find it a bit easier to reconcile. Where she has this moment where she sort of says, you know, her example of how they're disrespecting others as practitioners is she's like, you know, you're not respecting my court. You're bringing goblins in and like ruining the culture of others. And Avery's like, well, no, we're just prioritizing goblin culture over fairy culture. And Finnea's like, you're implying goblins even have culture.
Yeah, harsh.
And yeah, exactly. It's kind of like, look, you know, goblin culture is obviously not classically considered culture, but like gatekeeping other culture like that seriously undermined Finnea's whole point to me. Like the way she's kind of like, you guys aren't respecting other culture, and then just immediately calling out goblins for having none. I was like, well, way to just immediately jump off your high horse, like.
Yeah, it pretty clearly completely undercuts what she's saying.
So it's
um,
like, yeah, I guess yeah, it's that whole thing. You're right. Like they are doing some practitioner shit, but also she's hardly exemplifying tolerance and understanding of the little man herself.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, Finnea realizes pretty quickly that she's been beat and decides to negotiate after first starting to negotiate around the negotiation, which I thought was funny.
Yeah, and I mean, like this is great because, like, the second the Kenneteers actually have it under control, they're like, "Okay, listen, we'll negotiate with you and make something fair." And she's like, "No, you won't." They're like, "Yeah, no, actually, we will. You're not the fairy we want." And I just love this because like I talked last week about my tinfoil that maybe that this was some sort of test of their sense of justice, and it wasn't that. But if it had been, they'd pass with flying colors because the
Mm,
second they actually get the lead again, they go straight back to being like very fair and merciful. Like they
yeah,
obviously
they're not being spiteful about this.
no, they're very fair, especially because as Lucy mentions and Verona mentioned earlier, she was trying to sell them. Like it particularly hits home when Lucy brings that up. So there's definitely like the fact that they're really willing to be quite flexible with her here speaks magnitudes about like how good the three of them are as people in this position of power.
Mm, yeah, they're pretty good. Um, I love the clause that Verona puts in where she says, "If you try something and we catch you, we can pause 15 minutes and an hour to deliberate." Basically, if you try and fuck around and be a fae, we're just gonna let the goblins fuck with you back. Which I think is a great general catch-all clause when you're starting a discussion with the fae.
Yeah, again though, it's a little like mean with that. Like, it's a form of torture, I think. But yeah, yeah, there's a lot of good moments where the Kenneteers sort of, as they've got control, they're like, "Listen, if you just don't be a dick, it'll be fine. But otherwise, we're going to like, make you suffer for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think this is also the section where Verona asks for mercy about the gainsaying because she's like clearly really sick. And it turns out that technically the gainsayings in the palms of the Aurum, Mr. Proactivity himself.
Mm.
And he just, yeah, he sort of says, no, I'm not going to change anything because, practitioners' words have to matter. So you'll just have to live with this for like a week or whatever. And obviously that's hilarious because it's going to kind of line up with this 2 weekish deadline that fucking everything in the world is heading towards at the moment.
Yeah. But
Um,
it is fair enough, right?
yeah, like this was one of those situations where I was like, geez, like,
They
I don't
did
know.
accuse a completely unrelated fairy of this, and yes, that was a shenanigan, but still.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear from like listeners and stuff what they think because I think this might be the one case where I'm like, I think the Orum's actually kind of fair on enforcing this part of like the telling the truth stuff. Like, and because it's not forswearing. Like, the thing that gets me about forswearing is like Charles just has a
Mm,
miserable existence forever now.
permanently, yeah.
And like that's bullshit. Whereas like Verona, it's kind of like just a week of punishment, bit physical like punishment for my taste, but whatever. But it's just like I don't know. They did kind of fuck up. Like I can see it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the defense I would say for this is like they were intending to have a fair trial, and Mariska was the one who fucked them over. But I don't know.
Yeah,
Others kind of need to have some level of defense mechanisms. So,
yeah. I suppose as well, it would feel better for me if this whole truth telling thing like was done in a way where the actual truth mattered. Like you know what I mean? Like the one of the big things I've noticed throughout this story is just how bullshit all the truth telling stuff is because you can still lie,
yeah,
really.
it's more about lies of omission and tricky wording than it is about
Yeah,
actually are you being honest.
yeah, exactly. So I'd so much rather that whole thing of like the actual intent of your words mattering and stuff. So I'd be more okay with punishment if the system was fixed. But I'm not going to blame the Aurum for being the arbiter of this shit system. I think he's made the right call within that here.
Yeah, I agree.
Also, I just want to call out the nice little reflection on like Avery using this tactic of basically breaking down this fairy court into like a goblin, like it felt exactly like what America did when they visited the fairy markets in Arcade, where it was like you bring the goblins in and sort of bring it all down. And I just like sort of love the little connection to the fact that Avery does this alongside Liberty here to sort of do something good. Like it's taking. I feel like Avery was probably inspired a bit by this shit America did a couple of arcs ago, but this time she's doing it next to Liberty to do something good.
Yeah, I think it's cool stuff. I just like that it's Avery and Liberty hanging out and being blunt goblin slingers together.
Do you buy into this whole? Because I discovered this
Yeah,
week that
the
there's
the
the
Avery and Liberty ship. Is that what
yeah
you're about to
yeah
say? I probably don't. To be honest, I feel a bit awkward shipping any 13-year-old girl with anybody, so I'm
that's
I'm
fair.
trying to just keep out of it. But if it happens, I won't be too upset, But whatever. Um, so so Finnea concedes. Avery goes to check up on Pam, who has apparently been visited by Marissa.
But it's not so bad apparently.
Well, can we talk about this?
Yeah
What was Marissa here to do? Because
yeah yeah.
the end result of what actually happened was basically just Marissa came by and insulted a 13-year-old self-esteem. And like, sure, Marissa, like, it obviously will get under every skin, and that's great. But like, it doesn't fit into any kind of grander plan, does it? It's just kind of being shitty to a 13-year-old girl. I don't understand what the like tricky fairy thing that Mariska is trying to do here was. Maybe it was just that because there were goblins around and because obviously Marcy got thrown off at Jasmine's house and stuff like that, like she failed to do what she was trying to do. Because if this was her plan and went according to plan, I just do not get it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I definitely left this and I was like, this seemed like unless there's a part of this I'm missing, it's very petty and vindictive for like a
Yeah,
fairy plan.
yeah,
Like it did
exactly.
nothing. Um
Yeah, if is it just to be shitty to Pam and therefore Avery? I don't know.
no, I agree. There has to be something we're missing with it. Because like honestly, I feel a little bit the same about what she was doing at Jazz's place. Honestly, um, the best I can come up with is like some really tinfoil stuff about how Marissa actually does want that whole like the promise about giving them long and full lives,
Mm.
and so she wanted Avery to come confront Pam and for it to go well. I but like I don't know why she'd want like fucking fairy man. I don't know why. I could keep going down this why is she doing this rabbit hole, but I just don't know where she actually stands with the trio.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't know. Like you compared it to the stuff at Jasmine's house. I mean, at least that seems like it has a purpose, and we'll see next chapter. It's helped lead to, if not directly caused, this 2 week grounding, right? Which is obviously
well,
a yeah.
I see. I don't really think that's true. I think we talked about this last week, but like they were already on a curfew. Like I think Jasmine would have been upset with
Mm,
them and would have noticed they're going. Like it got worse because of Marissa, but
yeah.
like. Yeah, I don't know. I still maybe they wouldn't have gotten grounded for 2 weeks. Maybe it would have just been a 1 week or something. I don't know. Like
Mm,
even the jazz stuff, it kind of felt like I don't quite know. Yeah, it feels like there's going to have been something else she was doing with these 2 trips. I think, and I can't figure out what it was.
mm,
My optimistic tinfoil is just she actually is looking out for them in her own way.
yeah. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I think coming back to this convo with Pam, it basically goes as well as it could have. Avery lets herself have some nice moments and does what she feels she didn't have the strength to do previously, and it's kind of a good growth moment. It's lovely.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It definitely feels like exactly what we went through with Lucy in 11.12 with Paul. Like as we sort of hit what I think is the end of the story, we're very
Mm,
much like circling back on these earlier parts of their journeys from arcs 1 and 2 and really rounding them out.
mm,
And it's why I'm getting excited for the fact that now the big hanging thread out of those is the fact that Verona started dipping into the half light stuff. And I mean, Lucy brings this up next chapter, but like Lucy and Avery were scared out of their 2 things that they've just reconciled with because they did something and they decided they didn't want to do that and they didn't want to be like that.
mm,
Verona only left like Operation Turn Myself into Another because she was worried it would upset Lucy. Then she's kind of dived straight in the moment she actually has an opportunity to get the okay to do it from Lucy. And in fact, in this part where they're waiting for Jasmine, next chapter, Verona starts talking about how she's gonna try it again and what she wants to do differently.
hmm.
And I just have a feeling that's probably going to be one of the big things the rest of this arc has to deal with. I think Verona. I'm very worried that Verona is going to go too far into the half light stuff and really start to cause trouble for herself and those around her.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I guess we'll have to see. Yeah, I don't know.
Like it'll definitely be something in this arc because I just
Mm,
the it feels such a natural next step after like Avery with Pam here and Lucy with Paul a couple of chapters ago to head into Lucy and sorry to head in Verona and the Half Light stuff. But I feel like there's all these reasons for us to think the Half Light thing is going to be more of a well, it's not something Verona has really been scared off of in the same way, and she doesn't have that same
yeah.
relationship with it where she needs to reconcile. She didn't make her mistake yet
Yeah. Yeah.
and now she's gonna be locked in the house for 2 weeks or something. Like knowing she has to go back to her dad's at the end of that. Like, yeah,
um, yeah, I'm obviously pretty nervous about this. I think it makes too much sense that we're going to get more of Verona and her hopefully growth, I guess. But
yeah.
you never know.
I think by the end of it, it will be growth. But the
Mm,
concern is what happens in the middle there.
mm. So yeah, rejoining the rest of the group, the Kennet Council and the Kentiers discuss what should happen next, and Toady begins a vote to exile Mariska.
Yes, because basically Liz and Marissa have both retreated. So, I mean, victory, right?
Mm.
But the Ketters have won now.
Yeah, good job, Kennetiers. Yeah,
I, I suppose the rest of the story is going to be an epilogue.
the
We
Carmine
we
murder
did it.
has been solved.
Do you still think? Do you still think there is another conspirator we
Another
haven't
conspirator.
identified?
I don't know. I do kind of buy into the there must have been someone else leading the show before Mariska joined. Just that one scene that has got everyone thinking, where in Mariska's flashbacks, we went and saw her basically take over the Carmine conspiracy with Edith and Charles, and seemingly hint at another person that was running the show previously. I think that's just feels like a very strong evidence that there's something there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, especially because uh, I don't want it to be Charles. Like, the easy answer is Charles was doing it,
Yeah,
and I don't want that to be true.
I think Guillermet is also a top tier pick.
Yeah, he is. I feel like I've gone back and forth on Guillermet being a prime candidate, like, for months now. he he's definitely worth consideration, but again, he's another one. I just don't want it to be him.
Mm,
He really wins me over sometimes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Me too. Although, not in this next chapter.
Yeah.
um. So getting into 12.3, we're in Lucy's perspective now. Toadie's leading the vote for exile, and Guillermet and Miss weigh in with their thoughts and concerns.
Yeah. Something I really appreciate, like, that Wildbow / Lucy does at the start of this chapter is, like, refresh us on who's here, because it makes it basically very explicit that Charles is still refusing to show his goddamn face in this story, and it's just getting increasingly concerning / suspicious that he
Mm,
refuses to show up for anything.
mm.
And then also Edith is the only other person missing that she notices. Uh
Well, I mean, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, well, I really like how Lucy thinks, oh, somebody should go to Edith, and it's not like about guarding her, but it's more about protecting her and making sure she's not alone. Like, just good form, Lucy. Like, I really like that.
Yeah, she's keeping a lot of stuff in her head. She's definitely keeping all the kind of points that she needs to up there. So good stuff,
Yeah.
Lucy.
But I do want to say, there's someone she doesn't comment on being there, and also doesn't comment on them being missing, and that's like Ken / Ken's kids.
Oh, interesting. Didn't catch that.
No,
Yeah.
nobody mentions Ken being there, I don't think,
Hmm.
or KT or Nettie or anyone.
Mm.
And I don't, because they are meant to be a member of the council, right?
Well, yeah, they're part of the new Ken and Others.
Yeah.
I guess it's weird because they are Ken, so maybe they were there in a sense. But
Ken's always with us, I see.
yeah,
Um,
like
yeah, I mean, true. I don't know. It's just, yeah, it just jumped out to me a bit as like, it seems like it's been a while since we properly got Ken's perspective. Like, he's really sort of split himself up into his component parts, and that's all we've seen of him for quite a while. And just, yeah, I don't know.
mm,
I don't know if I'm suspicious of this or what. I just keep noticing that, like, everyone's around except Ken.
mm. Yeah, no, it's a fair point. I don't know. I didn't even notice it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, like, Lucy doesn't mention anything.
Yes, I guess I wasn't the only one.
Um, but yeah, sorry. So to go back to the actual meeting as well, I just want to call out, like, as we get into it. Obviously, Toadstool is like the new head here. There's definitely a few moments where Miss interjects, and you can tell that it's like she's got that vibe of someone who used to be the person in charge, and she's trying not to take over, but she can't help but, like, just butt in every
Mm,
now and then with, like, the things she would do in this situation.
mm,
And you could tell Toadstool is just like a little bit like, he's just constantly reminding her, "Hey, I am the one in charge now." And she's always like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah." But I just thought it was funny for somebody who's so against having a role that she keeps almost slipping back into the role of leader of Kennet.
yeah, and she starts poking Toad a bit about his relationship to Mariska, and it's a little bit of like, I mean, it's good because there is some stuff there, so it pans out. But even I was kind of like, all right, Miss,
Yeah.
you're not in the driver's seat anymore.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I like, it's absolutely good, as you said, that she asked, because Toadstool is, I don't want to call it testimony, but like his little speech about Marissa, he's actually the one who far and away comes closest to figuring out what's actually going on with her, because he's
Yeah,
like, she's a bit odd for a fairy. Like, she doesn't seem to want what normal fairy want. And I was like,
yeah,
yes, yes. And then he's
yeah.
like, and she's always doing things to like mask her trail and like so people won't know where she is. And I'm like, yes, you're almost there. Go on. Like, it felt like Miss just has those instincts and that ability to notice things that are going to disappear, and it feels like maybe she was channeling that when she asked him, because he's absolutely the one who seems the closest to figuring her out.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely a good ask by Miss. But I
But
do
yeah,
think Toadie is being very, very fair in this.
oh
Uh,
yeah,
like this exile of Mariska is basically she's in exile unless she wants to come and explain to us. At which point we'll give her a chance to explain. Like
that's
that's a
very
more
fair.
fair deal than yeah,
Yeah, that is outrageously reasonable. Um, I've got to worry, as we've mentioned with Fairy, you've always got to be a bit wary about giving them the ability to discuss things. But like the fact that they do this for both Marissa and Liz, I was very much like, okay, yeah, like this is very fair. And it's just like, hey, you're banned until we can talk to you about this. Like, you can't argue with that.
yeah. It's exceedingly fair. um, can we talk about Gilame? Because so Gilame basically stops the proceedings to be like, no, 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 I have to tell you this very, very important thing that it's really important I say before we do this vote. And then what he basically says is, Mariska might have a friend that I know about and we should go check it out, right? Like, that's pretty much it.
It's absolutely the sort of stuff that should have been in an email.
Yeah, yeah, it so is. And I'm kind of like, is so is this part of Guillermo in his fall to winter being just like obstinate and obtuse, or is Guillermo genuinely buying time intentionally from Mariska before she's exiled? So because as soon as she gets exiled, apparently they'll be able to tell like is she in Kennett, etc. Right? So maybe she has to do like one final shenanigan before she leaves. And Guillermo is buying time for that. Like that's how ridiculous this seemed from Guillermo. That was my go-to explanation.
See, so my argument against it being him buying time from Mariska is just he's meant to be better than that. Like this felt so much like shitty time padding that like I think him simultaneously calling Mariska an embarrassment for Fairy for being unsubtle would be
Mm,
wild if like he's doing that as he's clunkily buying her 5 extra minutes to do a plan in town.
mm,
Um, yeah, I just wondered if maybe he got really excited by the opportunity to kind of soapbox about how shit Marissa is.
mm,
Um, or maybe, yeah, maybe it probably just does have to do with the fact that not just that he's falling to winter, but that he's a fairy, and like a sort of through line throughout this whole section is obviously that like Lucy is just jonesing to get out of here. Like she's understandably in a bit of a rush to get home and make sure everything's okay. And like Guillermo just doesn't think about time factors like that. Like, he's always Mr. Patient. So like this could just be him being a fairy and not like channeling that other energy with like how the others waited like 2 or 3 months or whatever to actually awaken the Kenneteers. That whole
yeah,
othery vibe of like, oh yeah, mortality.
yeah. I guess it's a lead in from previous chapter discussing like human mortality and time spans, and now this where these eternal, mostly eternal beings just don't have good conceptions of the concept of urgency.
Yeah, well, and I think there's like other through lines between what just went down with Finnea in this meeting. Because another thing that really comes up is like Toadswallow keeps being like, Guillermo, you're distracting us. And then when Guillermo keeps doing it, Toadswallow, of course, being the mature man that he is, responds by getting even more distracting and off topic. And
Y-
there's just this real vibe to this meeting where like Guillermo will take them slightly off topic, and Toadswallow responds by just escalating it in the worst way possible, and then people like Matthew keep having to be like, guys, can we please get back on topic?
yeah.
Like Guillaume and Toadswallow work off each other in just the worst way for both of them.
Hmm.
Which is hilarious as well, because they're two of the like smartest schemers in this town. So just
Mm.
the image of like these two master schemers fucking you're face planting on each other, as they're like playing off each other in this terrible way is just funny because they come across like idiots. Um, but it really sort of sells like some of the stuff we started talking about with Finnea last chapter, which is like, we're trying to build this coalition of all others and respect them all, but like God, goblins and fairy, particularly winter fairy, are operating in very different ways, and like it's not all going to be smooth sailing. Um, like we used to talk about this a lot with the Kenneteers. Like they all work as different people, and a big part of
Mm,
teamwork isn't getting everyone on the same wavelength. It's about making sure everybody can work with each other's different wavelengths.
and kind of support each other's, strengths and weaknesses in the right ways.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we see Toad Swallow and Guillermo fail to do that with each other here. And
Yeah.
again, I wonder if that's sort of something we're going to start talking about a lot more as we sort of defeated Finnea being this toxic representation of that. It's sort of like, okay, but now we've got a bit of time off from our major villains. How does like a place like can it grow with all these very different people in it and without someone like Miss in charge? Like if you have a quote unquote biased person like Toad Swallow on there, how do you can this place work?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, but yeah, kind of a frustrating interaction between Toadie and Guillermo, isn't it?
But also funny. Like as I said, watching these two very clever guys just make idiots of themselves because they just can't stand the way the other one operates is
Mm,
very like humbling for them.
yeah. Yeah.
I'm very excited to meet all these other characters Guillermo does introduce us to. Like the pretty guy sounds neat. He ties into some of the alchemy stuff, I bet, so that'll be fun. But I'm much more excited for the fauna ephemera because they just sound like evil Disney animals, and I'm so into that.
Yeah.
Like they sound like the mice who dressed Cinderella, except they'll strangle you with the
Mm,
ribbons.
yeah. Yeah. I also am excited to meet this thing.
Like, yeah, the idea of like animals that travel in packs and are very beautiful, but like will actually be crafty and conniving with a flair for the dramatic. I was like, yes, please.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. Um, so yeah, Lucy starts to really lose her patience here as the vote finally kicks off. It's unanimous, and then the discussions and planning kind of continue.
Yeah, and like poor Lucy just really needed to have mentioned that she was in a rush earlier, huh? Um,
Well, she says to Tony that she's mentioned it before politely, and I was like, Lucy, you didn't really mention it that
it,
much, but yeah,
it was quite passive aggressive, perhaps.
yeah,
Like, yeah, it felt a bit like reading one of those Verona we've had a few Verona chapters where she's just like bottling something up until she explodes. Like 9.9 is obviously the big one.
mm,
But it's like it's a bit of a Verona chapter staple to sort of slowly watch her bottle things up till she explodes. And I got really worried that we were about to watch Lucy do exactly that, as she just kept like sort of calmly and indirectly bringing things up to people. Before eventually, she just sort of has to be like, "Guys, I really need to fucking leave. Can we hurry this up?"
mm, yeah, um, yeah. we'll, I guess we will get to why Lucy needed to leave in a moment, but before we move on, I'm kind of really excited and interested to see the scene of the Sig questioning because, like, Sig is so fascinating and such an interesting character to me. But I think the fact that Sig is pretty clearly not super like sentient, maybe the least sentient character that we know of in the story, I'm kind of expecting to have my heart broken by by what Sig will actually be like if we get a chance to talk to them. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, because we obviously had that Sig interlude, and like we talked about it when it came up, but he was missing so much of like emotion and certain parts of observation. Like
Yeah.
there's a
He
very
almost seemed like a passive observer in his own life, right?
yeah, yeah. Like he clearly draws a lot of his experience of the world from the people who are around wherever he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Part of me almost wishes that, like, oh, sorry, not wishes, hopes that we're going to get his interview in one of these dream sequences with Alpi that we're setting up at the end of the chapter.
Mm,
Just because we can interview him by having him roll around on books or whatever the fuck Edith used to do,
mm.
and that can work. But like, fuck, I'd love to see the personification of Sig and like what his version of like Monty being like Mister Classy, is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. If it's an Alpi dream, as obviously we get some indication that it might be, that might smooth it over a bit more. I don't know. We'll have to see, I suppose. Even so, like I'm nervous about what Sig interactions with Sig will actually be like.
Yeah,
I
well,
just like them, and I want them to be so nice and lovely, but I just anticipate things aren't going to be that good.
what was interesting is when we had the Sig interlude, I didn't get the impression that there was like that level of motive
Mm,
behind some of his actions. Like, like there was never that sense of like I am like doing this for this like underlying goal driven reason.
mm,
He would sort of do what Edith told him, but there I don't know, you just didn't get that sense of like he respected Edith for XYZ. I'm so interested to learn why he was siding with Edith. Was it just because she was a fire based spirit, or like, were there philosophical reasons? He didn't feel very philosophical.
mm,
So yeah, I don't know. I can't wait to see this.
yeah. Um, so yeah, Lucy loses her patience with all these eternal and motherless others, and she and Verona depart for their house, ready to face the music as Jasmine drives over to pick them up.
Yeah, and Lucy's thought as they're walking away is like her big problem with this meeting is there's so much bureaucracy and decision making and all this crap involved in that meeting. And I just thought that was a really interesting complaint to have after the fight with Finnea with the Aurum, because like we kind of saw what arbitration through a single streamlined judge gets you with the fight against Finnea. Like that's got its own problems. I just it's wild to me that Lucy was sort of in the headspace of like, oh, I wish we could have just like rushed this judgment on Marissa and Liz, because this idea to exile them and stuff isn't something I'd be super comfortable with if they like rushed it and didn't talk it out. I think
Mm,
obviously Guillermo talked it out a bit too much, but um yeah, I don't know, worth talking about.
mm, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know. Like eventually, what happens is Lucy just leaves Avery to be like her and Verona's sort of proxy for the rest of the meeting. And I couldn't help but be like, maybe you should have just done that for the vote too, like because I'd rather she not participate and vote by proxy than just like not do it a bit more slow and carefully.
Yeah. I mean, they have to make these decisions quickly, right? So I get that Lucy's probably not in the best headspace after the Finnea fight, and therefore is not in a great place to be kind of, okay, resting and thinking through these decisions. But there's not really, I don't know. I think it's good that Avery's, she just ditches and leaves Avery to make the decision, because I think Avery's the only one that's really in the frame of mind to be able to do it right
Yeah,
now.
well, yeah, because this is after she got to go deal with Pam, so like Avery has like rounded out her loose end
Yeah, exactly.
and is
Avery's
much more
riding
equipped.
on a high. She had a great interaction with Pam.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I thought it was a bit interesting that Lucy seems to be the one here who was just like, ah, bureaucracy. Because I was like,
Mm,
I have, I've bitched about my work on here before. Obviously, like I have very strong opinions about how too much bureaucracy can be a problem. I don't think that's what this meeting was. I think Lucy was just not in the right headspace to be involved in a decision that deserves the weight this was being given.
mm, yeah, yeah. Um, I want to call out something that I thought was pretty funny, which is this little moment where Verona has to think of a treat she can give to the spirit of Long, and so she just starts thinking about Long gifts. I just think that's hilarious.
Yeah, did we actually talk like last week or the week before about how interesting it is that she's just taken on the spirit of Long?
Mm,
Like that's such a neat and like other versy idea. Like it wasn't a spirit of like getting buff or something or like, doing big punches.
mm,
It was like this really kind of abstract and multifaceted. Like she used it at one point to make her arms long, but from memory, when we were in her head as well, she's also using it to like think long.
mm,
It's all these interpretations of long. It's so
mm.
interesting.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's so abstract in a way that that lets it be really multi-purpose in a great
Yeah.
kind of style.
Yeah, it's so much more unique than just having it be like strength or speed or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Um I'm just trying to think like what else could you do apart from noodles? Because noodles, like I guess they are long, but like there's got to be something. Like what about
Yeah, yeah.
uh really aged wine or something? It's been aged for a long time, and you emphasize that part as you like give it the wine. I don't know.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
Or
It's
get a
vague
foot
enough
long
that
sub from
yeah,
Subway.
yeah, exactly. Get 2 foot long subs that you've glued together to make a 2 foot long sub.
No, we find one of the ones that does catering, just like the 8 foot
Oh
long
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Subway.
yeah. Because the way that they make those, Elliot, I don't know if you know this, is they bake an 8 foot long loaf of bread and then make one giant sandwich before chopping it all up.
I've never had Subway catering, so I don't know if you're joking with me or
I
not.
am joking. That's not how they make that. They
I
just
wouldn't
make
think their ovens would be big enough.
no. Anyway, uh, back on topic. Yeah, I kind of wanted to. I mean, we see towards the end of this chapter here and a bit later as well. There's a bit of a, from Lucy's perspective at least, there's a bit of a rift between Verona and Lucy at the moment. And I was kind of like, oh, that's a bit worrying. But then also, like, they've just come off of a pretty serious trauma, and maybe their closest thing to a really bad loss. So I don't know. They're in bad headspaces. Let them make it up to each other when they're feeling better.
Yeah, because that's always really been their dynamic. Like, they're very different people, and they work so well as best friends because they take that extra mental step every time they interact of, like, thinking about the other person's perspective and, like, understanding them and where they're coming from. Like, they do communicate in different ways, but they're used to it and they work around it. Whereas, yeah, like, they're just too fucking tired and miserable right now to do it, and they're both making mistakes and pissing each other off.
Mm,
And there's very much just this moment where they're both like, "Let's just stop talking." Like, they're not ready to do the communicating in the way that they need to. Um, which again, like, feels like it's continuing to tie into that theme that we've talked about in Pale of, like, yeah, working together doesn't mean being on the same wavelength. It means
mm,
getting people on different ones to work together. And
yeah.
as we're seeing, like, the Kennet Council fall a bit apart in that regard, we're also seeing Lucy and Verona do it here. And yeah, I just wonder if that, like, that and Verona's difficulty with the half light stuff is just going to sort of be two of the angles we look at the rest of this arc through.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. I don't know. We'll see what their relationship looks like. I didn't really get the vibe that it was going that downhill. I think it was just tense moments.
Yeah, so yeah, I agree. I think it's just because they're, like, tired and shitty right now, but it's
Yeah.
like,
And clearly
y-
pretty stressed, as you would be and should be.
yeah, like, I think it'll get better, but just, like, some simmering tension still maybe being there a little bit as, like, Verona dabbles with the Half-Light stuff, or as they're
Mm,
trapped together in this room for 2 weeks. Like,
mm,
there's the potential for it to, just for that be the, like, the straw that breaks the camel's back with something else going wrong.
mm,
I don't know. Yeah. I think time and time again, the Kennedys have proved that their bonds are too strong to get broken up by, like, petty drama.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
I don't see it
definitely.
heading that way, but it'll be like, that one miscommunication could just lead to something else happening.
Mm, yeah.
I last thing we should talk about before, like, we get into the Jasmine scene proper is just as Jasmine picks them up, Verona mentions she's feeling quite unwell, and Jazz asks her where, and she's like, "Oh, my stomach, and I've got a headache." And Lucy's mom's just like, "Oh, so you're like your usual stress stuff."
Jazz is so on it. She's so on top
Yeah,
of this.
I love that because, like, I swear Verona barely makes that connection half the time.
Mm,
But also just at first I was like, "Oh, Jasmine, you don't understand. It's actually a lot worse right now." And then I thought about it more and I was like, actually, you know what? That probably is a fair assessment of what's happened to Verona. Like,
mm,
some of it is like the gainsaying and the sixberry stuff, but really all those are doing are, like, causing her the same sorts of stress that her emotional bottling up does.
mm,
Like, she's hurt herself here with the sixberry and with the gainsaying, and that's just manifesting in, yeah, that same sort of stress response she has to, you know, being stressed out. Like, I think Lucy's mum's actually more right than Verona and Lucy probably think she is.
yeah. Yeah. Um, so yeah, Jasmine asks what happened, and the Kennetiers struggle to give any good answers here.
Yeah, Verona goes, like, full Avery for a little bit when Jasmine's like, "So what actually happened?" And Verona just pauses for a second, and she's like,
Stuff.
stuff."
Yeah.
It's like you can feel Jasmine's blood pressure elevate as, like, that's all they give her. She's like, "What the fuck do you mean stuff?"
Mm, yeah. Um, it's nonsense. But there's this moment where Lucy almost tells Jasmine the truth, and like, God, such a strength of this story is I have no fucking clue whether it would have been a good idea or not, but holy shit, it felt like Lucy was about to crack and tell Jasmine the truth. And I was fucking terrified for it.
Yeah, I mean, I love how really Lucy's main reason for not wanting to do it, well, it's to protect her mum, because
Mm,
obviously bringing people into this world is a bad idea in general. But also, like, I love that there's the extra thing of like Lucy wants home to be a refuge. Like she's talked
yeah.
about this in the story before, and she mentions it here. Like, whenever shit goes bad, usually she can come home, and that's like her safe space.
Mm.
And if she awakens her mum or makes her mum aware, she is going to lose that as far as the magic is concerned.
Oh, yeah,
And
100%.
I think that's a really interesting point though, because like on the one hand, like your mum being able to actually know what the problem is going to help her create like more of us. But like all this really does is create distance between you and your mum because you can't actually talk about it. Like,
Mm,
is not being able to bring it home in that way healthy, or is that just like, not dealing with it?
mm,
I don't know.
yeah.
I think there's a case for her actually getting more comfort at home if she can talk to her mum about like the fact that a fairy just tried to sell her.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I mean, but the thing is, I was thinking about this. If Lucy tells Jasmine what's going on, like Jasmine is clearly being an incredibly reasonable parent and will continue to be if she knows about this magic stuff.
Which means
A-
she'll make them stop.
Well, exactly, because that's the reasonable thing, right? Like, is like, no, your children, you shouldn't be in this position. Like, get some fucking Blue Heron Institute practitioners involved and disconnect yourselves from it.
Yeah, stop trying to fix the world yourselves.
And that's pretty much exactly what Jasmine says, even
Yeah.
without knowing about magic, right? Like she says, "You've always had too much of a sense of justice. You shouldn't have picked an argument with a stranger." And then Lucy and Verona were like, "Oh, this short older guy told us we blah blah blah." And then Jasmine's response is, "Well, why didn't he handle it?" And I'm just like, even though they're telling Jasmine in air quotes lies, Jasmine just kind of immediately is like gives two very clear and very accurate um like questions and
Yeah.
like immediately picks on to like the exact right criticism of the situation, even though she's being told like 5% of the truth of what happened.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like it's this weird thing that's simultaneously an argument for making her aware or awakening her, and also just like not doing that, depending on your perspective of what you want the Kenneteers to be doing.
Mm,
Um, yeah, as an aside on all this, like my sister is now like halfway through Arc 2 of Pale.
mm,
She's
mm,
finally reading it. She was saying last night, because she's in town, this is her favorite part of the world, so far. Like the bit that's really jumped out to her as making like Pale better than most other stuff she's read is just the fact that like innocence makes sense because there's a disincentive to involve both your allies and your enemies. Um, it's just a good point. It's something I often overlook because I'm so used to it now. But like, it's such a cool mechanic that like, there's so much to consider when you think of the idea of awakening or making Jasmine aware from the Kenneteers' perspectives that go
mm.
beyond the uniqueness of their circumstances.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. um I also want to pull out this moment where Jasmine asks if they've had anything to drink and then asks drugs, and Verona says, "Not my thing." And like that, Lucy calls this out later as
Yeah,
it being effectively a lie, even if it wasn't in the wording. And I'm kind of like, isn't it? Is
yeah.
it?
I had the same response. When I read this the first time, I was like, well, like
Well,
I think by a lot of definitions, six berry mixture is going to count as a drug, Verona. Like, I don't.
yeah, and it is 100% her thing, right?
Well, yeah, like she's got that whole thing with the visions with Melissa. Like,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. She says not my thing. I think she wants that to be true, but like, there's absolutely no denying that like, it's an idea that has sat around her.
Yeah.
And yeah, like the six
Yeah.
berry mixture not counting is like bullshit practitioner technicality shit that like the Orama might let slide, but I'm not gonna.
Mm. Yeah, it's pretty rough. I don't know. Anyway, we'll see. Verona's already, taken a power hit, so what's one more lie among friends, I guess. So yeah, getting home, Jasmine continues to be the world's most reasonable parent, and the girls start to crash.
Yeah, and I really want to call out as we get into it the visuals of this scene in the car, like after Jasmine sort of parked it. Like it's a very, I've seen a bunch of movies and stuff that do this as well. Like where all the light is coming from, the street lights or the light in the house or the reflection of the headlights, it's very dark in the car, and you're just getting like people's like silhouettes and stuff. It just creates this great sense of like distance and sort of like the emotionalness of it all being like really intense, but also you can't quite read it. It's just great how he captures that visual vibe so effortlessly in like written text.
Mm, yeah. It is you can really picture this stuff, right?
Yeah.
I'm pulling out a line from later in the chapter, but one of my favorite images when we see Alpi later, we get this bit where Lucy's looking at Alpi and we get the line, rather than turn her head, she let hair cover her face, then had her face emerge from the morass of matted, damp, gritty hair out of alignment with neck and body, dark eyes wide. And as soon as I read this, I was just like, holy fuck, this language is so evocative and I just love it so much.
Yeah, and like that's also it's like it's a great execution of just a really cool concept. Like she doesn't turn her head, she just rearranges
Yeah.
her head.
Yeah. Oh my god, it's so good.
like
She's literally a nightmare and it's just so great.
I
Um,
that's what I love about Alfie, just like conceptually that she's like this kind of adorable horror movie monster.
mm,
Like everything we know about Alpie, like when you get to meet her, it's just like, oh, she's just Alpie. Like she's a bit of a ditz at times, but she's nice and we love her. And then everything she does physically is just straight up nightmare fuel,
mm,
or nightmare product, I suppose.
yeah. Um, but so yeah, Jasmine, I think the general theme here is Jasmine is unreasonably reasonable about everything here. She really is just like incredibly generous to these two in a way that I don't think she needs to be.
Yeah, I think there is an argument for Jasmine being too lenient here. I don't know if that's where I stand, but like, yeah, like I don't know. She's just like she doesn't even yell at them. She just like she communicates really well. I love as well that she qualifies all of her shit with like, these are
Mm,
the punishments I'm giving you, but fair warning, I know that it's really bad right now, so like I might adjust these tomorrow. Like that's incredibly mature and
mm,
also gives them a lot of credit for their ability to process that she's going to do that.
mm,
Um, so yeah, I guess we'll see what she says the next day. That's the second half of this, but I think the bit where I felt like maybe she's almost too lenient is the part where she does say Lucy gets to go on the date. I don't know.
mm. I think she. I mean, she mentions some stuff about like not wanting to be her parents and stuff like that. I think
Yeah,
that's her trying to be a very like um accepting and I think parenting, especially around like dating and sex for young children, is especially prickly, right? And my
yeah.
read on that was Jasmine's parents were maybe a bit conservative around some of that stuff, and she wants to actively push back against that, which is why she's being um, I don't know, like very permissive around it. I think.
I also think if you're Lucy's parent,
Yeah, yeah, totally. Because it is
like
what Lucy really kind of needs, right? Is some
yeah,
normal interactions.
like yeah, Jazz must like I think well from memory, Jazz was like over the moon at hearing that like Lucy had like just a
Yeah, of
normal date
course.
with a boy. So there's probably just a big part of her that doesn't want to set Lucy back in that regard.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I don't know. I feel like a big part of honestly as well, the reason Lucy probably gets this date is because Lucy doesn't fight that at all. Like when it comes up, like I was grounded for 2 weeks, Verona's the one who's actually like,
What
oh,
about the date?
Lucy
Yeah.
has the date, and Lucy's like, it's fine, I can
Yeah.
reschedule it.
Yeah.
Like this is fair, and that probably won her a lot of points.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean,
Um,
she's a good kid, that Lucy. She does.
yeah.
She's trying her best.
But that said, Jazz also has the reader's interests at heart because she
Mm,
decides that it has to be a group date, which I think is just very fun because that just doesn't feel like Lucy's vibe at all to me. Like I've always read Lucy very much as somebody who hangs out with like a small close group, not a bigger one. So the idea that it's going to have to be like 6 people on this group date is just, I think it's going to be very fun.
Mm. Yeah.
I'm a little disappointed Verona said no on her and Jeremy's behalf because, well, I think that was absolutely the right call. I would have enjoyed watching that train wreck.
Mm. Yeah. It would have been definitely wild. But I'm glad that Verona has seemingly is starting to get the concept that she shouldn't I mean, it's not quite stringing Jeremy along, but that is basically what it is.
Yeah, you're right. It's kind of encouraging because on the one hand, it's like the first sign that she is, uh, yeah, like as you say, recognizing that she really needs to make sure she's not leading him on or whatever.
Mm.
Um, but I'm a little skeptical as well because it comes in this form of this date, which she basically says is something he would love to do and I don't want to do.
Mm.
And I feel like the side of this that would really sell it to me, is she needs to start doing or turning down things she wants to do as well. Because it's like if she still does all the things she wants to do, that's just kind of more selfishly leading him on. Like, I mean, what she needs to do is have a fucking conversation with the dude and just like reiterate that they're on the same page. Because I think we were very skeptical when they first got together of the fact that she'd really sold that they're on different pages. Um, so I don't know. I'm still very worried about her and Jeremy's quote unquote relationship.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I can see it going very badly, or I can see it going mild to positive. So we'll see, I suppose.
It's a good sign that she's noticing this discrepancy in how they feel. I just need to see her starting to act on it or talk about it with him
Mm.
before I can really feel comfortable with what's happening.
Mm. Yeah. Um. So yeah. Their work is never over. So Lucy summons Alpy to help them conduct some meetings in their sleep while they are grounded.
Yeah, and it's fun. Like I feel like my guess is at this point we're going to start moving through the days a bit quicker now, kind of like we did in Arc 10, but maybe not that severely.
Mm.
But I'm super interested to see this next section of the story, which feels like it's going to be like everybody regrouping a bit, doing things like interviewing Sig, communicating via the dreams, and I guess getting ready for the actual finale.
Mm.
Um, this should be a really fun. I guess it feels like it's gonna be our final prep session.
Mm. Yeah. Um. Yeah. It feels like we're gonna head into the final bits of climax with little nice character moments to give us a bit of downtime before the final showdown, I suppose.
Yeah. We'll have Verona making herself not human. Everyone else getting ready normally. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the end of False Moves 12.3. As well as the end of the main chapters for us to discuss. But fear not, there is more to be discussed. We've got some power predictions coming in, some predictions from our community on what they think is going to happen next.
Yeah. So what have you got for us today, Ruben?
I brought in a theory from Captain Rhino, um, and they submitted. Basically, I think domain theories are coming in hot and fast
Yeah,
now.
there were quite a few of
Yeah,
those.
there was one from I think I'm easily impressed as well. But yeah,
uh,
so uh, Captain Rhino's take is a domain ritual is going to challenge everyone. We've just lost Marissa; she's just run off, and so Verona will use a domain ritual as a way to draw Marissa back into Kennet and into the open, so she can be confronted. And even as an extension of that theory, Michigan wants this to happen because one, it might expose, if this is Verona's domain, the house on Half Street, which is where they're holding the furs, and two, Verona has been gainsayed, so she's obviously extra vulnerable if she does this ritual. And I just think this all kind of ties together very, very nicely. So, yeah, I like it. I like it.
Yeah, it's hard to know with theories on this stuff because we don't understand what these challenges or whatever look like in practice.
Yeah.
Like, what are the rules around it? Is Verona allowed help? Like, if Marissa could challenges her, is like Guillerme allowed to be like, well, I'll fight for Verona? Like, can she name a champion? Like, I don't
Mm,
know. Um,
yeah.
so I love this theory, but I'm also like, I don't know how it works. So I'm excited to find out.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, I really liked it. I really liked it. I think domain theories are coming in quickly, and I like this one. It feels like it ties together quite nicely.
Yeah,
Um,
I really like the point that sort of comes up, which is that the fact that she's gainsaid will further incentivize her to do something like this, because we've
Yeah.
already seen her stress about being the one without the power,
Yeah,
and I think it's
exactly.
going to sit on her the fact that for the next 2 weeks she's going to be incredibly weak.
Yeah.
Something like prematurely launching into a domain ritual is totally a Verona esque response to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, what theory did you pull out from the pale prediction sheet?
So I pulled out one from I'm Easily Impressed. And they basically mentioned that in 12.3, Gilmay doesn't actually vote for Maricica's exile. Although I checked and it's like briefly mentioned that he did, but he doesn't get singled out like everyone else.
Mm,
And basically, I'm Easily Impressed has gone full tinfoil and is guessing that that's not Gilmay, it's actually Maricica.
mm,
Um, because they don't sort of actually declare themselves at the meeting. And I don't know that I genuinely believe this, but it's a very fun form of tinfoil that I can get behind.
mm, yeah. Um, yeah. I I like crazy theories like this, but I think this one might have been submitted before Wobber did an edit. So there was originally in 12.3, Gilmay wasn't explicitly mentioned in the voting scene, but there was a bit where it was like, oh, the remaining people and some goblins voted and it was unanimous, which was then changed to Gilmay and the remaining goblins voted and it was unanimous because people were like, oh, did Gilmay not vote? Um, so maybe this is
Okay,
where this theory came from.
that would be fair. This often happens to me because I read the chapters late. I miss the edits
Mm,
because I only see the edited one.
yeah.
Like, it came up last week when we're saying that about the cherry pop, like, things being misspelt. I was surprised that I was seeing that because usually they're fixed by the time I'm getting to the chapters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just checking when this one was actually made.
So yeah, this might have been a pre-edit, or if I'm Easily Impressed read the chapter before the edit and didn't see that there was an edit, it's
No,
possible.
yeah, you're right. I think this came out. I think this prediction was made about 45 minutes after the chapter came out. So yeah, okay, that tracks.
Um, so
Okay,
yeah,
my bad.
no, I mean, I still like the Gillimer secretly is working with Marisica type of theories. Or this one is actually Gillimer is actually Marisica, which is a more wild version of the theory.
As I
Anyway,
said before I even do about this clarification, I was still kind of like, I don't know if I buy it, but it's the kind of tinfoil that I can get behind.
um, so yeah. But that's our pale predictions. If you have a pale prediction, you can leave it in our pale predictor form, which will be linked in the show notes down below. Um, but before we wrap up, we also should revisit some of these discussion question answers, Elliot, because we've been running a discussion
Yes.
question for the last fortnight, which was if you were subverting yourself to fight a fairy, what practice would you lean into and what animal would your mask be? E.g., what's the part of yourself that you've kind of intentionally shied away from that you would lean into? What a great discussion question.
Yeah, I do want to thank everyone who answered because there's a lot of you mentioned in your answers. It was a fairly intense and personal discussion question. So thank you for taking the time to answer it despite that.
Yeah, definitely. This one got a little bit heavy, so thanks everyone who was being kind of vulnerable with their answers. But yeah, I really, really liked this discussion question, and it's for the reason why I like the Otherverse in general, which is like these fictional magical concepts, but they're also very, very, very different and interesting kind of narrative esque lenses to analyze yourself or others with. Right? It's like this
Yeah.
way to think about things in a slightly different way that encourages you to come to new understandings about yourself or whatever you're kind of analyzing. And I thought this was a delightful way to frame that, and we got some really, really fun answers as a result.
Yeah, this is a world built on the importance of meaning and understanding, and so many of the things within it are then useful for like analyzing characters or people and like yourself. Like, I remember we ran into this. I think like our very first discussion question in Deep Impact was like, "What would your implement be?" or something, and then it was like then we decided to answer it for ourselves, and it was like, "Oh, holy shit! This is like a very kind of intense personal journey you have to go on."
Mm,
Um, before we get into specific things, I did want to call out two trends, just because we'll sort of skim over these in some of the answers. But The first one specifically is that a lot of you seem to have read a lot of packed dice materials and mentioned a lot of packed dice stuff that I don't think has come up in Pale.
Mm.
So we're going to kind of skim over some of those answers. I'm sorry, in part because I didn't understand them because I have not read most of the packed dice things, but also just to generally avoid packed spoilers.
Yeah. I think it's also kind of worth noting that, like, a lot of these responses do get quite personal, and a lot
Yeah,
of them are quite long and in depth. And I loved all of them so much, but because of the format of our show, we're going to have to be a little bit light on them. So, again, just like, if you want, totally just go read them and cut
yeah,
off the
go read the whole
podcast here
thing.
because they're all delightful.
The other trend I want to call out is that I noticed that probably 80% of the answers involved uh, people saying that their normal form of practice would be something very hands off or like very academic, sort of subtle, or whatever. And most people, when trying to subvert that, went down paths that became a lot more physical or brutish.
Mm,
And I'm just starting to realize that perhaps the people answering our discussion questions from a podcast on a web serial are a bit nerdy.
mm. Yeah, who would have thought?
Yeah.
Uh, um, so yeah, should we get into some? Do we want to pull out some that were our favorites?
Yeah. Let's start
We've
going through them.
written. I'm looking through the notes, and there were like so many. I mean, this was maybe our most popular discussion question yet. So there were 20 maybe answers across the two threads. So
Yeah.
I don't know if we can go into all of them, but so they were all so delightful.
Yeah. God, sorry, I'm just you're right, there's so many.
Yeah,
Um I I wanted to call out Ace of Sword, who
yeah, yeah. I love this
um
one.
sort of would normally see themselves as probably being like a bit of a collector. Which
Mm.
I think normally a collector is someone like Bristow, except they collect things, not people.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a little bit more. I get, yeah, like my character in Pace.
Mm.
Um, so they were a little unsure what practice they'd actually lean into if they were subverting themselves. But what I thought was really interesting about Ace was they had a very clear idea for what their alternative mask would be. Like they thought it would be a bull because
Yeah.
they sort of mentioned they can be quite a big person and have had some issues with sort of anger management or
Mm.
stubbornness.
Yeah.
Where they brought up not being allowed to use drills as a kid, but getting the drill bits and manually drilling through wood just
Yeah,
by turning the
by
drill bit
hand turning a
themselves.
drill bit, which is crazy, and I think therefore means the bull mask 100% fits. I thought that was
Yeah,
great.
yeah, I absolutely agree. But like, so I had real fun after reading this answer, being like, okay, well, how can we go from that bull mask and the logic behind that to turn that into a practice?
Mm,
Um, and so it seemed like very stubborn and single minded to me. And I got like, do you remember those incarnations that we met in the ruins, like yearning
yeah,
and all
yeah,
them?
yeah.
I feel like dealing with like maybe more anger driven ones of those would
Mm,
suit this bull. Like being somebody who deals with oh no, like the people who were fighting John, like people working for war or something. Like very much doubling down on this one energy and then just like becoming that and like channeling that and using it like brutishly.
mm, yeah.
I don't know. I'm sure the people who answered this who are very familiar with pack dice are probably listening to what I'm saying and have a multitude of suggestions for better fits. I'm sorry, I don't know all these practices.
But yeah, I liked Ace of Swords' response, and especially the theories about the bull mask stuff. I want to pull out Hero Vorpal's answer, which is another one I really liked. The kind of flaw that they thought they would touch on was their kind of desire to, a tendency to think, okay, I know the right answer here, so I'll just kind of bluster over everybody and get them to go with what I know is the correct answer, even if it's not necessarily what they want to do in a situation, right? And
Yeah.
I love that. I love them recognizing this flaw and looking at it and going, okay, well, how can I do this? Maybe some kind of like I mean, that's a very practitionery thought in and of itself, right? Um, so kind of enchanty, they pulled out the spider mask with this quote of trapping someone in their own web, but for their own good, which I just thought was so delightfully villainous that it would fit perfectly in the practitioner universe.
Yeah, it definitely felt similar to the energy we saw from Avery
Yeah,
in these chapters.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I love this idea of like because I definitely remember being like that in my past as well. Like that idea of like thinking you know what's right for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, if I was in charge, it would all be better.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I
Yeah,
think like leaning into that impulse, I think most of us have had is a really like interesting lens.
yeah. Um, another one that I also really liked was Ascending Dragon, um, who kind of thinks about, a lot of people, the way they did this was focus on what they think their practitioner, specialty or mask would be, and then what a kind of subversion of that is. And Ascending Dragon got to this subversion of like, basically just leaning into the tendency of them wanting to stop other people from winning more than winning on their own terms. In the sense of sports they played and stuff like that, where their basic goal was to be a spoiler, right? Somebody who spoiled what other people were doing. Um,
Yeah.
and I just love that, and I love that this was something they wrote 2 weeks ago, and now it's very much ties into the themes of the wolf in Avery's 12.2 chapter. I just thought that was delightful, so I thought it was worth bringing up.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I loved that sort of movement of like, oh, rather than like being somebody who's all about like protection,
Mm,
instead moving into kind of first striking, like
mm,
very aggressive protection. Yeah. Uh, I guess on a very similar sort of note, Giles Zal had an interesting one. They sort of mentioned they generally value having like a big tool set. I think they talked about being a collector as well.
mm,
But like their focus tends to be like being on the side and not sort of being the front man.
mm,
But they used to play a lot of contact sports and do things like cross country. So they reckon like an alternate path for them that they could lean into for this sort of situation would be really fast, like speed based in your face practices. So they name dropped like stuff like goblins and things, but like I got like very Avery wielding her hockey stick vibes from how they described it.
mm.
And they talked about having a cheetah mask because cheetahs are all about speed and they tackle their prey, but they're not stealth or trickery, which would be Giles Zal's normal thing. Like it's moving away from stealth and tricks to just like I will run you down and tackle you.
Yeah. Yeah, good stuff. Um, I really liked Kipos's answer.
Yeah,
Kipos did basically wrote it definitely read like a bit of a short story, right? Where it was
yeah,
almost a description of somebody of a somebody that really rode the line between practitioner and other, I think, and existed in online spaces. I think a very personal one, and I feel weird about kind of analyzing it, especially because it is personal to Kipos. But I just thought it was a great, absolutely great piece of writing, and a really great, I don't know, self-reflective, a great example of what I mentioned before as a self-reflective tool, I suppose.
yeah. Like Kipos sort of mentioned in her follow up comment, like basically this was the version of herself she saw that didn't ever bother trying to learn to empathize with people, and like
Mm,
you really sort of felt that in the writing. It was
mm,
yeah,
mm. It felt very sad. It was like
yeah,
it was very in a very otherverse way, very tragic, you know?
yeah, yeah. They didn't write themselves a happy ending.
No, and not also not like clearly a character that was intentionally somewhat malicious, but in a very kind of Greek tragedy kind of way, I guess, where their maliciousness also was just ruining themselves and poisoning themselves.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um. We also got a response from Megafire, who, if that same name sounds familiar to you, it's because you can listen to them last week.
Yeah.
Um, and Megafire brought up this really interesting point that they tend to avoid drugs and alcohol because they really value having control of their mind and like being able to respond the way they want to, and so yeah, like basically that really valuing self control in that way. So they might try to let go of that in order to subvert themselves to fight a fairy. So something like alchemy, like Verona's experimenting with, or like maybe some of the stuff like Matthew did in Edith's interlude, like
Mm,
when he souped himself up to fight.
mm.
Um, and so then Megafire paired that with like a sort of monkey mask, like to tap into this sort of sense of like getting, I guess, more animalistic and leaving aside their ability to like have self control.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Another great response. Loved it.
Yeah.
Any other ones you really want to pull out, Elliot? I could read through these all day, but you know.
I'm easily impressed. Wrote one that felt like it was a bit of a personal attack on me because it's talking about how being a collector is bad, and so they would be a collector,
Mm,
because they're currently trying to avoid being a hoarder, and that is something I definitely battle with every day.
mm, yeah.
Uh, and we should really call out stuck in Reddit factories answer, which was the
Mm,
last one we got right at the end here. Stuck in Reddit factory said they were the first in their family to finish high school, and they also graduated from university. And they said,
yeah.
they specifically chose avoiding things like working in a butcher's shop and stuff in order to like chase academia. So that's what they could lean into. And what they were saying is they're very into like cooking. And I think the implication was that their like degree is in chemistry.
Mm.
So like taking all of that like cooking and chemistry energy and sort of twisting it to be much more like butchery focused. So like focus on the part of food preparation that's the like killing and the disassembling of the meat. Um, I really liked this answer. Like
Yeah.
that's a really interesting thought.
Gruesome and grisly, but I
Yeah.
did quite like it.
Um, and like they mentioned having a pig mask because
Hmm.
pigs are like brutish and greedy and they'll like
Well,
sniff out.
they definitely have that stereotype, don't they?
Yeah, I mean not all. Like Wildbow's avatar's a pig. He's got a pig
And I
mask and he
think
seems
pigs are meant to
pleasant.
be quite smart and intelligent creatures, so let's not be too mean to them. But yes, they definitely are like, you know,
Sorry, these are stuck in Reddit Factory's words, not mine.
yeah, yeah. All
Um,
right.
but
Watch
yeah, no,
yourself, Elliot.
no, there are definitely because isn't there like a whole thing with having pigs as pets?
Mm.
Oh, there's like some movie coming out with Nicolas Cage. Sorry, did you see the trailer for that?
Yeah, yeah, pig.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Looks
looks
good.
wild.
And then there's like, Okja or like Babe. I mean,
Babe.
these are all pigs. These are all movies that are like, oh well, pigs are actually good. Um, but yeah. Anyway.
But no, there's definitely like like evil pig imagery with like like the I really liked Stuck in Reddit Factory's point of like like using their sort of nose to sniff out and like
Mm,
like find the prizes and things that are hidden by stuff like glamour and then just
mm,
like being greedishly brutish about it all.
yeah. So yeah, I loved all of these answers. I thought they were all really great, and thank you all for leaving them. But we have a new discussion question for some new great answers. Elliot, do you want to introduce this one?
Yeah, this one has ended up being quite similar to that previous one in its sort of vibe, I guess. So
Mm.
hopefully everyone's ready for more self-reflection. Um, uh, because basically, now that we sort of understand what the wolf is, I think that it's your antagonist. Our discussion question is: what form would your wolf take?
Mm.
Or, I suppose, look, if you had enough of the self reflection in the last 2 weeks, pick like another character from a popular story, or another wild bow character or something, and say what you think their wolf would look like. But yeah,
Mm.
like whatever. Just like I want to explore this idea of like both in personality and appearance what does someone's antagonist look like?
Mm. Yeah, I think it's fun. Yeah, pick a fun character or take the lens to yourself again, and let's see what happens. You can of course leave your answers to that discussion question in our discussion threads, which we linked in the show notes below.
Yes, don't forget those show notes also contain a link to all the rules on the fan art contest. So if you can draw, and honestly, even if you can't,
Mm.
um, check that out. Try and submit something to us, and see if you can win the cash prize.
Mm. Yeah. Um, you can find more information about that or all the other great shows on the Duff Media Network at the Duff Media website, duffmedia.com, including all the other great shows on the network. I know the Duffcast just released their episode on Bo Burnham's Inside that has kind of taken the internet by storm. So that's definitely one that I'm looking forward to listening to.
Yeah, I think it's also when this is coming out, the book club has happened about 8 hours ago,
Mm-hmm.
and the game club is happening
In
in
about
about
eight
12
hours.
hours.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, the book club was just on. I think it's Foucault's Pendulum.
Yeah.
Um, it sounds like a very dense book. I did not keep up with that one. But in the Game Club, we'll be talking about a much less dense story-wise thing. We're talking about Doom,
Yeah.
the 2016 one.
You've finally taken all the advice of all those people who keep telling you to go to hell, Elliot. And we'll be talking about your experiences there on the Game Club. So join us for that.
If you like this show or any of our other shows, check out the Doof Patreon, patreon.com/Doof Media. We only get to do the things we do because of that Patreon. In fact, we've just been buying a lot of equipment for our live stream, which we're very excited for. And that is all coming from funds that we've been allocated via that Patreon.
Yeah, we've kind of been leaving money that we've been earning from the Patreon in our account for a while, waiting for the right thing to spend it on. And oh boy, some of the stuff that we are buying, y'all. I'm so fucking excited. I want to mention it, but I know it will start to spoil things, so I can't, but I want to so bad.
It is getting harder to not mention some of the stuff.
Some of the things we got planned is fucking wild. Also, while you're on Patreon, do make sure you head on over to Wildbow's Patreon. Otherwise, it's going to ground you for at least 2 weeks. You can support him and make sure that he has the resources to keep doing what we love him for doing, which is writing these wonderful stories.
Absolutely. And so with that, we'll see you next week for more false moves.
Mm-hmm.